Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today is day 36 in our 90-day SAT prep series. Today we're going to be spending about 20 minutes with the SAT math section, and then we'll switch over and do about 25 minutes with the SAT writing section. So for today's math section, we're going to be going through SAT Practice Test 4. We're going to do problems 31 through 38 of the Math with Calculator section. So keep in mind that there are not going to be any A through D answer multiple choice options. We're going to have to find the answer on our own for these because this is the free response part of the SAT Math with Calculator section. So as I go through, I'll be giving you my tips, tricks, advice, strategies, and overall impressions of how I go through the SAT math section, how I'm very, very efficient in how I do it, and all of the tips and tricks that really got me to score 800 on the math section on back-to-back SATs. And then after that, we're going to go over to the SAT writing section, where I will give you my tips, tricks, advice, strategies for the SAT writing section, things that I look for, patterns, and things like that. That helped me score perfectly on that on back-to-back SATs as well. All right, so as always, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and let's go ahead and get started with question 31. So a partially filled pool contains 600 gallons of water. A hose is turned on and water flows into the pool at a rate of 8 gallons per minute. How many gallons of water will be in the pool after 70 minutes? Okay, well, we start with 600. We have 600 gallons at first. We know that we're adding 8 gallons per minute. So 8 gallons per minute, gallons per minute. How many gallons of water will be in the pool after 70 minutes? So we have to multiply by 70 minutes. Okay, we see our minutes are going to cancel. We have 600 gallons, so I'll put a G there. Right, so now we do 600 plus 8 times 70. We'll plug that into our calculator, 600 plus 8 times 70, and that's going to give us 1160. Okay, so our answer there is going to be 1160. That's how many gallons we're going to have. All right, so one tip that I put in is I would say just make sure that you're canceling units, right? That can always be helpful. So if you want to do that, go ahead and do that. For example, I had gallons per minute times 70 minutes to get rid of my minutes, and then find my answer in gallons, right? I had 1160 gallons. Okay, so that's one tip you can use to make sure you're doing the problems right with word problems like that, is to put the rates and make sure your units cancel. All right, now we got 32. We got the normal systolic blood pressure, P, in millimeters of mercury for an adult male, X years old, can be modeled by the equation P equals X plus 220 over 2. According to the model, for every increase of 1 year in age, by how many milliliters of mercury will the normal systolic blood pressure for an adult male increase? All right, well, this could be rewritten, right? This equation for pressure could be rewritten as X over 2 plus 220 over 2. Okay, and if we rewrite it like that, then we see that if our age X increases by 1 year, then we're going to increase our total pressure then by 1/2. Okay, so our answer there would be 1 over 2. So that one right there, that one's pretty easy. All we got to do is make sure that we understand that if we have this X over 2 right here and we increase X by 1, that means we're increasing P then by 1/2. Okay, so just understanding that that X over 2 is the relationship we're really concerned with there. So that one's not too bad at all. Now we got 33. Okay, the pes, a Roman measure of length, is approximately 11.65 inches. It is also equivalent to 16 smaller Roman units called digits. Based on these relationships, 75 Roman digits is equivalent to how many feet? Okay, keep in mind this is feet, not inches, to the nearest hundredth. Okay, we got 12 inches as 1 foot as well. All right, well, we know that we have 1 pes is equivalent to 11.65 inches. We know that it's also 1 pes is equivalent to 16 digits. Okay, we're told we have 75 digits. So in order to get to feet, we're going to have to convert those digits to pes first. So we have 75 Roman digits. Now, how many pes is that equivalent to? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the number of pes that's equivalent to up top. That way it saves me time and steps, and you'll see why in a minute. So the number of pes I have over this 75 digits, so I'll put digits as D, must equal the ratio between the two, right? So how many pes do we have for every digit? Well, we know that we have 1 pes is equal to 16 digits, so 1 pes per digit, which we'll just put as or per 16 digits, right? 16 D representing digits. Okay, so what we do is we multiply each side by 75D then to solve for how many pes we're going to have. Right, so we multiply each side by 75 digits. We see we have 75 then, 75 digits over those 16 digits, right? The digits cancel and we have pes then, right? Because that pes is still there, right? Those D's are going to cancel, right? So we'll have 75 pes per 16, right? 75 over 16 pes is how many we're going to have. Okay, so we know that. So we got how many pes we have now. Now, how many inches is that many pes? Well, we know each pes is equal to approximately 11.65 inches. So now we take this 75 over 16 pes that we have. We have to multiply it then by that 11.65 inches per pes. Okay, once again, we see our pes will cancel there, and we'll be left with our answer in inches. So we have 75 over 16 times 11.65. I'm going to plug that in my calculator. So just give me one moment to do so, and you can do it as well if you're watching this. So we plug that in our calculator, and that's going to give us 54.61 about, right? 54.61. Okay, so at that point then, we have our answer in inches, okay? But we need to answer in feet. So what we do then is we multiply by 1 foot per 12 inches. Okay, we have 1 foot for every 12 inches. We see our inches then will cancel, and we'll be left with our answer in feet. So what that's going to be is 54.61 over 12. Plug that into our calculator, and that's going to give us 4.55. Okay, 4.55 will be our answer there. Now keep in mind, I rounded this to 0.61. If you're using your calculator, just use the answer key, right? So it really was 54.609375, right? So obviously you'll use that just by doing pressing divide by 12, and it'll drop that answer down. So it'll be answer over 12, and then that'll get you that 4.55, okay? And we're asked to round to the nearest hundredth. The digit after that 5 is a 0. Okay, so we know for sure we're going to round to that 5. So we're going to have 4.55 as an answer. Okay, 4.55, and we see that that's in feet because our inches canceled. So that tells us that we're answering in the correct units as well. Okay, so our answer there will be 4.55. So as far as big tips for number 33 is just notice how I cancel out my units to make sure I finish in the correct units and I'm doing the correct relationships and ratios correctly. Anytime you have to convert a lot of different units, like in this problem, you had to convert from you had to do digits to pes, then you had to do pes to inches, and then you had to do inches to feet. There's a lot of potential to mess up your ratios there. So in situations like that, I highly, highly recommend that you make sure you're canceling your units like I did here, right? So just call digits D, call pes is short enough you can write it out, call inches IN, call feet FT, and then just go through, cancel out your units until you finally get to your answer in feet. So that's really a great strategy there to make sure you don't make a simple mistake. So answer there is 4.55. Now we got 34. So in a study of bat migration habits, 240 male bats, 160 female bats were tagged. If 100 more female bats are tagged on top of that 160, so we'll have a total of 260, how many more male bats must be tagged so that 3/5 the total number of male bats in the study are male? Okay, that means that we're going to have 3 over 5. Okay, that's the ratio of male to the total. We know that we have 240 male bats, right, at our beginning. So we're going to have 240 male bats to start, plus however many we have to add, right? How many more male bats we have to add. So we'll call that X. Okay, and that's going to be all over our total number of bats. Now we know that we had 160 female bats, but we added 100 onto that, which means we now have 260 female bats, and we have 240 male bats. Okay, so the total we have right now is that 240 plus 260, which is 500. Now we have to keep in mind our total is going to change as we add more male bats to 500 plus X, right? 500 plus however many more male bats we add. Okay, so now we have our ratio set up. Now we just go ahead and solve for X. So to do so, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply each side by 500 plus X, multiply by 500 plus X, cancel this out. Okay, so now we're going to have 3 times 500 plus X. Okay, we're going to distribute our 3 to that 500 and to that X. So we're going to have 1500 plus 3x, and keep in mind that that's all over this 5 still. Okay, that's all over 5. Okay, that's equal to 240 plus x. Now what we're going to do is multiply each side by 5 to get rid of this 5. So we multiply by 5, get rid of it, multiply this whole part by 5. We see we're going to have 5x, and then 5 times 240, I'm going to plug that into my calculator. That's going to give me 1200. So now I've got 1500 plus 3x is equal to 1200 plus 5x. Okay, at this point, I want to keep my coefficient in front of x positive, so I'm going to subtract my smaller coefficient in front of x. So I'm going to subtract 3x from each side. Okay, that's one thing I always recommend doing is keeping that coefficient in front of x positive. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 1200 from each side, so that way I have x set equal to a constant. Subtract 1200 from 1500, that's going to give me 300. So now I got 300 is equal to 2x. I divide each side by 2 to solve for x. I see that x is equal to 300 over 2, which is equal to 150. Okay, so 150 will be my answer for 34, 150. So that one right there, it's not too bad as long as you paid attention to details, understood you had to add that 100 to get that 260 for the females, and then understood how you set up your ratio, that 3/5, and then remembering that you had to keep that total, include the male and female plus whatever you add to the males after, right? So once you set that up, it was just a matter of getting all your x's onto one side. So first getting them in the numerator, so there was nothing in the denominator, then setting them all on one side equal to a constant. So that one right there is not too bad. Okay, so answer there is going to be 150. All right, now we got 35. Okay, so we have Q equals 1/2 NV squared. The dynamic pressure Q generated by a fluid moving with velocity V can be found using the formula above, where N is the constant density of the fluid. An aeronautical engineer uses the formula to find the dynamic pressure of a fluid moving with velocity V and the same fluid moving with velocity 1.5 V. What is the ratio of the dynamic pressure of the faster fluid to the dynamic pressure of the slower fluid? Okay, the faster fluid is this 1.5 V. And we're asked for the ratio of the faster to the slower. Okay, so the faster is that 1.5 V. Okay, and that slower is, and keep in mind that this is Q of F, right? So the dynamic pressure of the faster to the dynamic pressure of the slower. So it's not actually just going to be F over S, right? But in this case, we have 1.5 V is going to be our faster moving fluid, and 1 V is going to be our slower moving fluid. Okay, so the dynamic pressure of our faster moving fluid, that's going to be half N, okay, times 1.5 V squared. Okay, so 1.5 squared is 2.25, okay, and I know that my 1.5 N, or 1/2 N, is going to be the same in both, right, so that would just get canceled, and I'll show you that in a minute, but we know that V then, V squared, if it's 1V, it's just going to be 1, so I know that my ratio then will be 2.25, okay, so that'll be my answer, and I'll quick show you how I get there, right, if you really wanted to show all your work, which I don't recommend on this question right here, you should not be showing all your work, and I'm going to show you why in a minute here. Right? What I did here is this 1/2 N, that's going to be present in both of them, right? So when I create that ratio, it will just cancel in both of them, so I didn't need to worry about it. All I needed to worry about was V squared. Okay, 1.5 squared is 2.25. If you don't have that memorized, I would recommend memorizing that and putting it in your notes. That 1.5 squared is equal to 2.25. Okay, and then 1 squared was 1. So I immediately knew that the ratio of their dynamic pressures was going to be 2.25 over 1, which is just 2.25. Okay, so I'll just quick show you how that cancels just so you know, but I wouldn't recommend actually writing all this out. I would just recommend recognizing it will cancel. So it would be 1/2 N, right, times that faster moving fluid, which is going to be that 1.5 V squared, all over 1.5 N, or I'm sorry, 1/2 N times that 1 V squared. Okay, so now we see that 1/2 N, right, they're going to cancel. Okay, now we see 1.5 V squared, that's just going to give us 2.25 V squared, or I'm sorry, not V squared. It's going to equal, or yeah, it would, 2.25 V squared all over 1 V squared, right? V squareds cancel, you're left with 2.25 over 1. Okay, so that one right there, if you wanted to show out all your work, that's what it would look like, but I don't recommend showing all your work. I recommend just recognizing that 1/2 N is going to cancel, so just get rid of it, and then just doing the V squared over V squared, right? So it'd be 1.5 V squared over 1.5 V squared all over 1 V squared, right? And then that's going to get you 2.25. So that's how I'd recommend doing it. Rather than writing out that whole thing and canceling, just recognize that they're going to cancel. And now we got question 36. So we've got a circle here. We've got center O. It's got radius 10, so I'll put a 10 here. Arc length AB, shown in bold, is between 5 and 6. What is one possible integer for the value of x? Okay, that's my degrees here. So what I'm looking at, since I have my arc length and a radius, I'm going to look to find what my arc length over my circumference is, and then use that to find my ratio of my degrees here over 360, right? So I want to solve for my x degrees out of 360 degrees total. So I'm going to take my arc length AB. We say it can be between 5 and 6, so I'll just pick 5.5 because it's right between them. Okay, so I'll take that 5.5 and I'm going to set it over then that total circumference, which I know is equal to my diameter times my pi, or 2 times my radius times pi, which I know then is going to be 20 pi, right? Because my diameter is going to be 2 times this radius of 10, which is 20. Diameter times pi is my circumference, so my circumference is 20 pi. Okay, now that's not my answer, okay, but we got circumference is 20 pi, so we put 5.5 over 20 pi. Now we're going to multiply each side by 360 and solve for x. Okay, multiply by 360. So now we got 5.5 times 360. We'll plug that in our calculator. 5.5 times 360. Then we got to divide that by 20 pi. Divide that by 20 pi on our calculator. Okay, and we see that that's going to give us 31.51. Okay, Now we're asked for an integer, so we can't answer with a decimal. Okay, keep that in mind. We're asked for an integer for the value of x. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to the nearest integer, which I know is going to be 32, right? And since I picked 5.5, whatever the nearest integer is pretty much almost certainly going to be an answer, right? So I'll take that 32 degrees then, and I'll just check, make sure it works. 32 degrees over 360. I take that then, and I'm multiplying it by 20 pi to make sure it's going to equal something between 5 and 6. Okay, so I'll plug that in my calculator, just make sure, multiply it by 20 pi, and I see that that's going to give me 5.58, right? 5.58, which is obviously between 5 and 6, so 32 degrees would be my answer there for 36. Okay, 32 degrees. Okay, now keep in mind that you're not going to have to plug in your degree sign when you fill in the bubble sheet, so you just answer with 32. Other acceptable answers were 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, or 34. Okay, those were all acceptable answers. So by picking that middle term, I was pretty confident I could just move on to the next integer, right, from that 31.5, because I picked the middle, right? So it's very, very likely that that 32 is going to work out. So that's how I approach that problem. That's how I'd recommend you approach it, is picking that number in between them. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. We got that one was 36. So now we're going to go to 37. So we've got 37 and 38 are referring to the following. The stock price of one share in a certain company is worth $360 today. A stock analyst believes that the stock will lose 28% of its value each week for the next 3 weeks. The analyst uses the equation V equals 360 R to the power of T to model the value V of the stock after T weeks. What should the analyst use for R? Okay, well, this is an exponential growth / exponential decay question. In this case, since it's losing 28% of its value, it's exponential decay. All right, so that R value, since we're losing 28% of our value, it's going to be 0.72, right? 0.72 would be our answer here. Now I'm going to explain why right now. So if we're losing 28% of our value, that means we have 100% minus 28%. So we're only going to retain 72% of our value. Now, if we only have 72% of our value, we write that in decimal form as 0.72. That's what we're going to multiply for R. Okay, so that one right there, not too difficult of a problem in my opinion. If we're losing percentages, that means we're going to want a number less than 1, right? So it'd be 0.72 if we're losing 28%. 38, to the nearest dollar, what does the analyst believe the value of the stock will be at the end of the 3 weeks? Okay, disregarding the dollar sign when gridding our answer, obviously, because we can't grid a dollar sign. Okay, so at the end of the 3 weeks, what we're going to do then is we're just going to take V, set it equal. We got 360 degrees is what we're starting with. R is going to be 0.72. Okay, and we're raising it to the third power because it's after 3 weeks. So now we're just going to plug that in our calculator. So we got 360 times 0.72, all raised to the third power. And we're going to get 100. Does it tell me to round it all? To the nearest dollar. Okay, rounding to the nearest dollar. So that's going to equal 134.36. Now we're told to round to the nearest dollar. Since this is below 0.5, we're going to round down. So that's going to give me 134 as my answer. So that one also not too difficult of a question. Okay, that one's really just plug into your calculator. So overall, you can kind of see that these questions, they're not too difficult, right? If you compare them to what's in the multiple choice section, right around 24 to 30 of the multiple choice of the Math with Calculator, these really aren't more difficult than those. In fact, I would argue that they're easier than those, right? I'd say 36 was one that could have been probably equally hard maybe to one from 24 to 30. Other than that, though, the other ones are pretty much, in my opinion, 34 is another one that maybe could have been as difficult as one in 24 to 30. But overall, you kind of see that these free response ones, right, they're not too difficult, okay, because they're not meant to be necessarily that difficult. Because there's not really a whole lot you could do without putting in an A, B, C, and D to make it difficult necessarily. So as far as trends, though, in the Math with Calculator for the free response, you will notice that generally questions 31 to 38, they're going to get more difficult as you go from 31 to 38. Same trend that you see with the multiple choice section where it gets more difficult on 1 through 30. You'll see that, but what you will see is that it's easier to do 31 to 34 or 35 generally than it is to do 24 to 30 of the multiple choice. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind for now. And with that, let's go ahead and switch over to our other section. All right, so for the writing section today, we'll be going through SAT Practice Test 6. We're going to be doing the first two passages, so that'll be questions 1 through 22. So as I go through, I'll be giving you my tips, tricks, advice, and strategies for the SAT writing section. I'll really be trying to break down each question because if you can understand what the question is testing you on, then it makes it a lot easier to answer the question. So really focusing on teaching you what I look for on this test because I have scored perfectly on the SAT writing section on back-to-back occasions. So I really want to help you understand what you can look for in order to find the right answer very, very quickly. Okay, so part of that is understanding what you're being tested on. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Make sure that you have a notebook out so you can kind of take notes on what I see and things that you can adopt as strategies when you take the SAT. So we have a necessary resource for science. In the winter of 1968, scientists David Schindler and Greg Brunskill poured nitrates and phosphates into Lake 27. Then I see I have a comma and then this is one. I know I want to get rid of this is and have a comma and then just say one of the 58 freshwater bodies that composes Canada's remotely located experimental lakes area. So how do I know I want to get rid of this is? Well, if I keep this is, okay, if I kept that, then I have an independent clause here. And I can't connect two independent clauses with a comma because I also have an independent clause up here. I can't connect those with a comma. I can if I have a comma and a fanboy, but I don't. Okay, so immediately what I'm thinking whenever I see this is after a comma is I'm thinking get rid of it and then have a comma and then just say one of the 58 freshwater bodies. Because once we get rid of this is, then we have a dependent clause after it, and we're connecting an independent clause to a dependent clause with a comma like that, and that is grammatically correct. So we see then that our answer for 1 is going to have to be D. Okay, we can't say A, and I've already shown why, because that'd be two independent clauses connected with a comma, no fanboy, so that's grammatically incorrect. If I was to do a period and then do which, that would also be incorrect, because then that which is one, that creates a dependent clause. A dependent clause can't be its own sentence. If we were to do a period and then say one, once again, we'd have a dependent clause, which cannot be a sentence. Okay, so we connect that dependent clause of that one with a comma there. That's correct grammatically. So that one's really testing our ability to get rid of redundancy, right? Saying this is redundant, so we want to get rid of it. And then after getting rid of that redundancy, creating a grammatically correct sentence. All right, so Schindler and Brunskill were contaminating the water not out of malice, but in the name of research. While deliberately adding chemical compounds to a lake may seem destructive and irresponsible. I know that that's a dependent clause because we started with a subordinating conjunction. Well is a subordinating conjunction. If we start a sentence with a subordinating conjunction like that, then it's going to be a dependent clause to start. So I know that dependent clause ends after irresponsible. So anytime we start with a dependent clause, we're going to want to have a comma at the end of that dependent clause, as we do here. Then we say this method of experimenting is sometimes the most effective way to influence policy and save the environment from even more damaging pollution. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, that's absolutely grammatically correct. There's nothing wrong there. Okay, we have our dependent clause that ends after we're responsible, so we put a comma there. Okay, then we just go into our independent clause. So that one right there, that's perfect. A is correct there. Let's run through why B through D are incorrect real quick. We don't want to put a comma in a list of two. Okay, destructive and irresponsible, that's a list of two. We don't put a comma after one of them. We don't split it up. C, putting one after and like this, we don't put one after and right there. C is incorrect. D, destructive and irresponsible. This method, our dependent clause ends after irresponsible, and our independent clause starts here. So that comma needs to come after irresponsible, not after method. So D is incorrect as well. All right, moving on. Schindler and Brunskill were investigating possible causes for the large blooms of blue-green algae or cyanobacteria that had been affecting bodies of water such as Lake Erie. Okay, now I'm asked to combine two sentences. When I'm asked to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these two and try to come up with a decent answer choice as to what is going to be correct. So when I do that and I'm asked to combine sentences, I look for pretty much two things. I look for number one, is it grammatically correct, right? I have to do it grammatically correct way of doing it. Grammatically correct. Okay, so that's one thing I look for. The other thing I look for is for my sequence of events to be in a logical order, so logical sequence of events. Okay, I want my events to move chronologically or in the order that they would happen. So those are really the main two things that I'm looking for. So we have, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, and then I see I have oxygen depletion kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. All right, one strategy you can use is anytime you see a word end one sentence and then start the next one, look to get rid of it in that next one. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of this, okay, and then we're going to say oxygen depletion, which kills fish, okay? Since we're ending with a subject that is not a person, we would say which kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. Now, what if we ended with a name? What if we ended with a name like John? We ended with John in this sentence and started the next one. Well, then we'd get rid of John down here and put who. Okay, but in this case, since it's oxygen depletion, we'd say which kills fish and other wildlife in lakes. So if we're looking for an option that has that, The quickest way to find it isn't going to be to read through all of them. The quickest way to find it is going to be to read through the shortest one first and then go shortest to largest, because generally the shortest one is going to have the least redundancies and be the most efficient. So we always start combining sentence questions with the shortest answer choice. I see that's going to be D, so that's the first one I'm going to look at. In addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion, which kills fish and other wildlife in the lakes. Yes, that's absolutely perfect. D will be our correct answer for 3. That's the most efficient way to say it. That's absolutely perfect. We can quick run through why A through C are wrong as well to give you a better understanding of the test. A, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. A colon there, and then the result being that it kills fish. Okay, this part right here, the result being that it kills fish, that's very, very wordy, so A is wrong. That's wordy. We don't want to be wordy when we're doing the combining sentences questions, or ever. We never want to be wordy on the SAT writing section, ever. And I'm going to get a drink real quick because my throat is really dry. All right, so as I was saying, we never want to be wordy on the SAT writing section ever, so A is incorrect. B, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion. Okay, then we say the algal blooms again. We don't want to say something like that twice. B is incorrect. It's wordy as well. C, in addition to being unsightly and odorous, these algal blooms cause oxygen depletion and oxygen depletion. Okay, we're repeating that twice. C is incorrect because that would be repetitive and redundant. All right, just weeks after the scientists added the nitrates and phosphates, the water in Lake 227 turned bright green. And then we have a period, and then we have it was thick with. So I know we're probably looking to combine them in some way or work with punctuation errors somewhere. Okay. So if we're going to say it was thick with, obviously that's referring to Lake 227. So I'm going to look for a way, really what I'm looking at here. Okay, so immediately after I read this first sentence, right, just weeks after the scientists added the nitrates and phosphates, the water in Lake 227 turned bright green. Okay, now we're continuing to talk about the effect that those nitrates and phosphates had on the lake when we say it was thick with the same type of algal blooms that plagued Lake Erie. Okay, so that's really illustrating that idea in our first one, or expanding upon it. I'm sorry, not expanding upon it. It's illustrating that idea in our first independent clause here. And since we're illustrating the idea in our first independent clause, we connect that with a colon. So B would be our correct answer there. Okay, since we're illustrating that idea that we had in our first independent clause, we're going to connect it with a colon. Only option here with a colon is B, so B will be our correct answer for 4. All right, moving on, we got question 5 now. One mission of the, okay, so I'm asked for the best transition from previous paragraph to this one. I can't make that choice without reading the rest here, so I don't even read this yet. I'm going to wait to read it till I read the rest of this paragraph, or at least halfway into it. That way I can have a good idea of what it's about. So the scientists divided the lake in half by placing a nylon barrier through the narrowest part of its 8-figure shape in one half of Lake 226. Okay, I know I haven't talked about Lake 226 yet. I talked about 227 up top, so I want to make that transition. So that's going to be part of what I want my transition to be. They added phosphates, nitrates, and a source of carbon. And the other, they added just nitrates, and a source of carbon was added. I already said it was added, so I want to get rid of anything that says added, or anything that says plus a source of carbon, or also adding a source of carbon. So A, C, and D are wrong, and B will be my correct answer for 6. Now let's go back and answer 5. We know we want to introduce Lake 226. I see the only one that says that is option C, so I'll go ahead and read through that one first. To isolate the cause of the algae, Schindler and Brunskill performed another experiment, this time using Lake 226. Yes, that's perfect, because we talked about Lake 226 here, so we want to indicate a shift from 227 to 226, and that's answer choice C. All right, so that's going to be C for number 5. That one was pretty good, pretty easy to identify as it being the only answer choice with Lake 226 and us having to introduce that somehow. We've already answered 6, so now we're down to 7. So the experiment confirmed, that's past tense, their suspicions when the half of the lake containing phosphates was teeming, which is also past tense, so that's good. We're maintaining our tense there with blue-green algae. Okay, whenever I see the word was or have or had or were, that means I'm probably looking at a tense question most of the time, especially when there's a verb after it. So I see was teeming. I know that that was is referring to this right here, which is the half. We ignore of the lake because that's preposition or a prepositional phrase. So the half, that's singular, so we need a singular verb. Teeming is a singular verb. We know it's in the past tense, so we need to have was there, and we have that as well. So correct answer there is going to be A, no change for 7. Okay, so that one right there is testing us on our ability to match tense and to match number. Okay, tense and number. Okay, were here would be if it was a plural. Okay, but half is singular, so correct answer is was teeming. All right, moving on to 8. Schindler and Brunskill's findings were shown off by the journal Science? No. Okay, so this question right here, anytime we see a word underlined in the middle of a sentence or 3 words underlined in the middle of our sentence like this, and we look at our options, right, and they're all different kind of word choices, and that kind of tells me it's a tone question, okay? It's a tone question, so I want to maintain an academic tone. Saying shown off by is not maintaining an academic tone. Saying put in the spotlight of, also not an academic tone. Also, it's wordy, so that's wrong. Saying published in, that is an academic tone, so that'll be my correct answer for 8. So 8 will be C. As far as why we wouldn't say put into, once again, that's not really an academic tone. Also, that's just not really high-level writing, and this is a fairly high-level writing piece, right? It's an academic piece. An academic wouldn't say put into, they would say published in. All right, the research demonstrated a clear correlation between introducing phosphates and the growth of blue-green algae. Okay, now I see I have one word beginning of the sentence followed by a comma, so I'm looking to link my 2 sentences here or transition between them. Legislators in Canada passed laws banning phosphates in laundry detergents, which had been entering the water supply. Okay, so I see that we talk about how research is showing how phosphates cause algae. Then I'm talking about a result of that research, which is that there is legislation now banning phosphates. Okay, so that's something that is not an example of what happened, it's a result of it. Okay, it's not something that was similar to it, so B is wrong. It's not a contrast, so however is wrong. It's something that came after it, that was subsequently, right? Subsequently, or it happened subsequently after it. It happened after it in time. So D is our correct answer for 9. Okay, that's the only logical transition between those 2 sentences. All right, D, at this point the writer wants to add a second policy outcome of the research described. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? At this point we're looking for something that talks about public policy related to phosphates. So option A says Lake 226 continued to develop blooms of blue-green algae for 8 consecutive years after the experiment took place. There's no policy discussed there, so A is incorrect. As far as B, in the United States, many individual states have also adopted legislation to eliminate or at least reduce phosphorus content in laundry detergents. That's correct. We talk about a specific public policy that was adopted as a result of research on phosphates. Not necessarily this research, but research as a whole. So B will be our correct answer for 10. We'll go ahead and cover why C and D are wrong real quick. C says, in 1974, Schindler initiated a study of the effects of acid rain using Lake 226 to examine how sulfuric acid altered aquatic ecosystems. There's no discussion of policy there. D, aerial photos of the lake taken before and after convey the effects of phosphates in water to the public. Once again, no specific legislation or public policy introduced there. All right, 11, experiments like these can help people understand the unintended consequences of using certain household products. Okay, now I'm asked for a choice that effectively anticipates and addresses a counter-argument to the argument in favor of the types of experiments described in the passage. Okay, so this would be a counter-argument to the experiments where they use real lakes, right, and they're pretty much messing up, or not messing up, but they're altering the content of lakes, okay? So we have option A, of course, regulating the use of certain chemical compounds can be controversial. Controversial? No. We're looking for an option that really talks about how even though we are using lakes, we're using them responsibly, right? And we're not using every single lake. We're only using a couple and we're using them responsibly. That's what we're looking for here. B, many companies offer phosphate-free alternatives. No. C, obviously scientists should not be allowed to randomly perform experiments on just any body of water. Yes, that's acknowledging that counter-argument to this experiment. That counter-argument being that scientists shouldn't just mess with water bodies. In this case, they're saying obviously they shouldn't be allowed to just randomly do it on any body of water, but on specific ones they should. So that's addressing that counter-argument. C would be our correct answer for 11. All right, now we've got our second passage of the day, so let's go ahead and go down to that. So we got questions 12 through 22 are based on the following. A little to the left, but not too much. So Italy's Tower of Pisa has been leaning southward since the initial stages of its, okay? This is the wrong its. This is a homophone question, okay? The correct version of its is ITS here with no apostrophe because we're referring to it owns the construction, right? It's referring to the Tower of Pisa. Okay, in this case, it's a pronoun referring to the Tower of Pisa, and it owns that construction. So correct version of its will not have any apostrophe, so our correct answer there is going to be D. All right, question 13. Let's go ahead and get down there. So we have one word beginning of the sentence with a comma after it, so I'm looking to link my 2 sentences, find a transition there. Okay, so my first sentence was introducing leaning of Tower of Pisa and how it leans. Now we're saying if the tower's construction had not taken 2 centuries and involved significant breaks due to war and civil unrest which allowed the ground beneath the tower to settle, the tower would likely have collapsed before it was completed. All right, well, I know that that's not a result of what came before it, so therefore is incorrect. I know it's not really in spite of what came before it, so nevertheless is incorrect. And I know we're not contrasting what came before it, so I know however is incorrect. Okay, so indeed is my correct answer there, right? we talked about how it's been leaning since it was created, and indeed that lean would have caused it to collapse if all of these events, right, these significant breaks, right, which allowed it to settle, the tower would likely have collapsed before it was completed. If it wasn't for all of these chance events, really, this tower would have collapsed, right, is basically what we're saying. So we're really really, indeed's really the only word that could work here. This isn't really a category that could work. Indeed is really pretty much the only word that could possibly work here, right? A is going to be our correct answer for 13. Now we got question 14. So luckily the tower survived and its tilt has made it an Italian icon. Now I have a comma here, and I see I have the word it. I talked about this before, but anytime that I already said my subject, which in this case is the tower, right? And I see I have a comma and then I say it, or I were to repeat the word the tower, I want to get rid of it because I already know what I'm talking about. And then if I see I have a verb after that, I want to get rid of whatever is at the end, right? And I want to put an ing. Okay, I've talked about that before. I'm going to talk about it again right here. I would take this comma, keep the comma, get rid of my subject, which is it in this case, and take off the s, or if it was an ed, I'd take off the ed, and I'd put attracting, add that ing to that verb. Okay, so correct answer there is going to be B for 14. Okay, that's something that you'll see a decent amount with the SAT writing practice test and on the SAT, hopefully, because you'll be prepared for it after me telling you that. But that's what I do with those. Okay, so answer there is going to be B. Okay, that's an easy way to get to the correct answer quickly. All right, so now we got question 15. So we have from all over who flock to Pisa to see one of the world's greatest architectural weirdnesses in the world. That's terrible. Okay, we're not going to say weirdnesses. This is a tone question. We want to maintain that academic tone, but we also want to make sure it's accurate according to the text. Okay, so deviations, no, that doesn't really, we wouldn't describe the Leaning Tower of Pisa as a deviation in the world, but we would describe it as an oddity in the world, right? It's odd because there aren't many buildings that lean like it, okay? Abnormalities, we would not say it's an abnormality in the world, we would say it's an oddity, okay? This is maintaining our tone that we've had throughout our passage. C is our only question that maintains that tone. All right, question 16. So 16, I'm asked if we should add a sentence. When I'm asked if I should add a sentence, I should have read the sentence that came before it and then the sentence that comes after it. So let's read what comes after. So after it, we have, by the late 20th century, the angle of the tower's tilt reached an astonishing 5.5 degrees. Then I have a semicolon, so I know I'm starting a new independent clause. In 1990, comma, that's good, Italy's government closed the tower to visitors. Okay, that's perfect. I don't need to change anything there. 17 is going to be no change, right? There's nothing wrong grammatically. I need to have a comma after 1990, so I can get rid of C and D. And then I don't want to have a comma between government and closed, so B is wrong. A is my correct answer for 17. All right, so back to 16 now. Okay, closed the tower to visitors and appointed a committee to find a way to save it. So should we add that unfortunately the tower's tilt has steadily increased over the centuries, placing the structure in danger of collapse? Yes. Why? Because we're shifting our focus in that discussion. Okay, we started out talking about how the Leaning Tower of Pisa was going to possibly collapse, and then we talked about it as an Italian icon. Now we're talking about how it's still in danger of collapse and we have to save it. So that's really a change in our shift in our emphasis of our discussion. So yes, we want to add it because it's indicating that shift. Okay, so answer there is going to be B for 16. All right, so that's 16. We already answered 17, so now we're down to 18. The committee was charged with saving the tower without ruining its aesthetic. Which choice provides the best main point of the paragraph? In order to say the main point of the paragraph, I got to read on. Or best supports the main point of the paragraph, I got to read on. The committee's first attempt to reduce the angle's tilt, placing 600 tons of iron ingots, molded piece of metal on the tower's north side to create a counterweight, was derided because the bulky weights ruined the appearance of the tower. The attempt at a less visible solution, sinking acres into the ground below the tower, almost caused the tower to fall. Okay, that's really showing me that we want to make sure that this tower is stable, but we want to maintain the aesthetic of its lean, right? The uniqueness that it has with its lean, we want to maintain that, but make it safe. All right, so we're going to look for an answer choices that supports that point. So option A says no one had managed to achieve yet. That's wrong. B, although not everyone on the committee agreed on what the aesthetic was, that's not what we're talking about. We need to talk about the aesthetic, but also the tower's tilt. Okay, so C says, which meant somehow preserving the tower's tilt while preventing that tilt from increasing and toppling the tower. That's absolutely correct, right? We want to make sure that we have the tilt still for its aesthetic, but we can't let that tilt anymore because then it's going to collapse. Okay, so C is our correct answer there. All right, so that's 18 is going to be C. Now we are on 19. Okay, 19. I see I have a 1 up front, which means I'm going to go find whatever sentence I'm asked to place and read that first. Okay, so to make the paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed where? I see sentence 5 says Berland, and I go ahead and answer it, right? I answer this as I read through. Berland advocated using soil extraction. removing small amounts of soil from under the tower's north side opposite its tilt to enable gravity to straighten the tower. All right, so Berland advocated using soil extraction. So to me, that's going to either be a verb tense question or something like that. So let's take a look over here. I see all my verbs are the same. Okay, so I know it's going to be tense, and then I also see I have the word use. It has different uses here. So I'm looking at tense, right? What's the ending? And then I'm also looking at how I want to use idiomatically. Okay, so as far as what I would say, if I were just saying this out loud, right? What I would say is Berland advocated using soil extraction. I wouldn't say Berland advocated to use soil extraction because we know that he already did this, okay? So he's not advocating to use it, he's advocating, or he advocated using it, right? This is in the past tense. To say to use would switch that tense over. Okay, so B is wrong. C, advocated the using of, that's wordy. We wouldn't say it because it's wordy. It's also not idiomatic. D, advocating to use, once again, wordy and idiomatic. Also, it's advocated because it needs to be past tense. So correct answer for 21 is going to be A, right? We need the past tense advocated, and then using is the most concise way to say this. Concise way to say it. Also, it's idiomatic. So 21, correct answer there is A. Okay, so now we've read that sentence, right? We know what should come before it is a discussion of Berland wanting to use that soil extraction. What should come after it is more of a discussion about how that soil extraction takes place. So let's go ahead and read, and we'll find where to place it as we read. Enter committee member John Berland, and then I have, he is a geotechnical engineer from England. I know that that's wrong. Okay, I talked about this earlier, and I'm going to say it again. Anytime we say our subject in a previous independent clause and we have a comma after it, I'm going to look to get rid of my subject. Okay, get rid of my subject. Now in this case, I got to get rid of my verb as well, right? I can't take is and then make it an ing, so I'm going to get rid of my verb as well. Now what I'm left with is John Berland, a geotechnical engineer from England, who saved London's clock tower from the Big Ben collapse. Okay. Now that is correct right there. All right. So what we're going to do there is we're going to get rid of that underlined portion. So why is it correct? Let's go ahead and explain that. Enter committee member John Berland. That is an independent clause. I have a comma after it, so I need to have a dependent clause after this, or an independent clause and a fanboy, but I don't have a fanboy after it, so I need to have a dependent clause. A geotechnical engineer from England who saved London's clock tower from Big Ben from collapse. Yes, that is grammatically correct because this is a dependent clause. We connect our independent clause with a dependent clause with no redundancy or repetition there, so D is correct for number 19. All right, Berland began a years-long process of drilling out small amounts of soil from under the tower. And then I see that took several years to complete. I want to get rid of that because I already said a years-long process. So anything that talks more about years is going to be redundant. So I'm going to get rid of A, B, and C, and I'm going to delete that underlined portion for 20. Okay, now what did I talk about when I talked about placing sentence 5? I said what we want to talk about is the soil extraction process, right? We introduced that in sentence 5, which means if we're going to introduce that and then go on to explain what that consists of, we start saying what it consists of in sentence 2. Right? We say that he begins this process. Well, before he can begin that process, he has to advocate for it. So before he begins the process, he's going to have to advocate for it. So sentence 5 has to come after sentence 1 and before sentence 2. So correct answer for 22 is going to be A. Is that all the questions, or do we have more? I think that's all of them. So let's go ahead and just do a quick check for today. I think that's everything. Let's just run through it, see if we've got all of them answered. I believe we do. We'll quick check this, make sure we didn't miss any. And we did not miss any. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for today. As always, if it was helpful, there'll be a donation link in the description when it's up and running. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Any private SAT tutoring I'm doing will be linked in the description. Any private college admissions consulting I'm doing will be linked in the description. Make sure to have a great day. And yeah,